Well, the first thing I typically have to talk about, politely or impolitely, is reporters don't give a shit about us. Their job is not to promote us. It's not a commercial exchange. And they don't care about that. What they care about is something quote unquote newsworthy to their readership.
Hello, and welcome to the Misadventures in Marketing podcast, presented by the American Marketing Association San Francisco chapter. I'm Steve Haney, a fractional CMO in Silicon Valley.
And I'm Peter Farago, a high-tech marketing executive in the Bay Area. Each week, Steve and I come together to discuss all things in high-tech.
We share our own experiences running marketing teams with a special focus on technology startups, our successes, our failures, what worked and what didn't. We'll also be inviting our CMO friends and other marketing colleagues onto the show every once in a while and hopefully impart some wisdom along the way. Peter, how's it going?
It's going great. Today we're talking about public relations. Always wanted and always difficult to get. But what are you thinking about with PR? How do you want us to frame this discussion today?
Well, I thought it would be a good idea to put context around how it used to be just in the very recent past, what it's like today in the world, in a world of social media and live video and, a lot of real-time spontaneous communications, and then talk about how you form a PR strategy when you do it yourself, when you bring in an agency, when you start hiring your first in-house folks, and then giving all of that some context around some of the experiences we've had and lessons learned.
I love that as a roadmap. Let's start with your own personal experience. I know that you have certain feelings about PR. You've told me before.
The thing about PR, it's a super people job. Like it's all about the relationships with the reporters, building those connections, building your collection of individuals that you reach out to when you're in an industry or in a vertical. And I'm just not good at that. I always found it really difficult, which is why I've always brought on an agency to do that work. The other reason I like bringing on agencies is you usually, for whatever vertical you're in, there are agencies that have very deep contacts within that vertical at the various press outlets. And they've had those relationships for years, if not decades, so that when John Doe or Jane Doe from XYZ PR firm calls, the reporters at those publications will pick up. That's always been a challenge for me, actually picking up the phone and talking to people. So how do you do it, Peter?
The media relations piece, the outreach or the pitching is one part of it. I think, first of all, I do a lot of it because, getting a good agency at a minimum is $15,000 a month, and that's probably on the low end. If you want a full team working on your PR that's really strong, you're looking $25,000, maybe $30,000 a month. So, you're talking about $250,000 a year when you're in a small startup. That's not probably feasible. I think it's, really about newsworthiness is how I approach it before I even think about the relationship. We develop hooks or angles and you pitch those, and you have to be aware of what's in it for the reporter or the journalist. They have an audience.
Yeah.
So a lot of it to me is about satisfying their audience's needs and coming up with something that they'll feel good about reporting. And then there's, of course, tips about how to make it easier for them to cover your news. Normally, the number one thing is newsworthiness and having to educate your team, like your colleagues internally, about whether or not we can even get press.
Right. Well, could you talk a little bit about earned, paid, and owned media? Because I think that's a really great framework.
Paid, we'll start in there, is pretty straightforward. It's usually advertising, display ads, search ads, paid social, that kind of thing. You're going to advertise on Google across all their properties, whether it's search ads or display ads primarily. If you're doing mobile, there's AdMob and so on. And then if you're going to do a lot of social, you're going to be looking obviously at Facebook or Meta that has Facebook and Instagram. There's TikTok, to the extent one can still advertise there. There's Snapchat, there's Pinterest, and so on.
So,
And
so
then,
social media is owned media, meaning it's your content that you're putting out through your channels.
well, there's three parts of that framework. The first part is paid media, which is search ads, display ads, paid social. It's things
Right.
that you pay for. So you can target the audience based on various variables and serve ads against it, right? LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn is expensive because it's very targeted B2B advertising. So the problem with paid is it's extremely expensive. And when you're
Right.
small, you can't do well there. The other problem with it is basically if you don't have good credibility or reputation to get placed in organic search, then it's going to be harder for you to win in paid search as well. They're related. So there are three parts: paid, earned, and owned. Paid is all the advertising stuff. Earned is anything that you get that is off of your site that's pointing back to you that's valuable. And it's usually more credibility building in nature, but it's getting earned speaking spots at a conference. Not paying for them, but getting invited to be on a panel or speak at a conference. It's getting included in a press article, a trend story, getting an article about your company, about a launch you're doing, funding you got. And what you really want is to get a backlink to your site, because the high quality backlink from a high domain authority website like VentureBeat and TechCrunch
Right.
have 90 plus domain authorities, or sometimes called DR. I think it's like domain reputation. This is how Google's engine works, right? It's pointing people who show intent around a certain thing toward the destinations that are related to that. When people think about earned media, it's mostly PR. And then, of course, there's owned. Owned is anything that you can reach out to that doesn't require coordinating with anybody or paying anything, really. So that's like traffic that's already coming to your website, people who are subscribing to your newsletter or your blog. If you have a Substack, if you have a social, if you have a LinkedIn profile for your company, the number of people who follow you there, I'll hit a certain number of people that I quote unquote own already as far as attention. Paid is the easiest. It's easiest to do, but it's also the thing that if you're doing it, it could work. And if you're not doing it, it just stops. Now, PR is super powerful and it can help you with organic, again, because of those backlinks, but it's not something you control. It's something you try to influence. And this is where it becomes a very difficult game. It's a long game. It's a relationship driven game. I mentioned earlier, it has a lot to do with newsworthiness. Are you relevant or not in the eyes of the journalist trying to cover you or considering covering your story as it relates to their audience? So yeah, it's quite valuable, but it's very difficult to get for smaller companies. Larger companies have assigned reporters. People will cover an area, a sector, a beat. Then when you want to get news and you're below that threshold, it becomes a different game.
Right. One of the metaphors I've always used is that, with PR, somebody else is blowing the horn for me, or they're providing a megaphone to their audience, who is also my audience, and they're able to get the word out for me. And, I don't have to do that myself. So I'm kind of leveraging this big asset they have, which is their audience and their traffic. And it's, they're doing the work for me and they've got huge leverage because of what they do. That leverage, I feel, is really what's critical, right? Because you can't reach those audiences, but they can. And before social media, before the interwebs and all this wonderful stuff, you depended upon these reporters and these publications. If these publications don't give your product a good review, then it could kill a product, and it could have a real detrimental effect on the company. But it's different now, because even as a startup, at the very least, you can go straight to your audience with your story and your message.
I think there's a distinction between, say, product reviews versus, versus call it news coverage. Back when it used to be magazines and newspapers, that's how people got their news. The news layer was the intermediary between organizations and large audiences. Then we went to the internet, and there was a more direct, immediate set of relationships built between internet news organizations versus, say, print, or some of them went from print to online, maybe in a hybrid way, and that further changed the landscape. Then you had blogging, much more fast cycle. Like TechCrunch is not Bloomberg, for example, or Time Magazine, that has a different journalistic bar about getting 3 sources and all this other stuff.
Right.
They are
Right.
much more fast cycle. And what's important to say, a TechCrunch or a VentureBeat is being first in the story, because then they rank in the Google search engine, right? So they have different cycle and speed, and therefore depth of checking that happens. And then what's completely disrupted all of media news, online and otherwise, is social. People get their news from Facebook and Instagram and other places. And when I was at Yahoo, which is a very large media company, we had a lot of great research and found that only 1/3 of people seek out news. 2/3 of people bump into news. And the majority of those people are bumping into news based on what their friends were posting to Twitter or X, or to Facebook or Instagram. And so, you have this really challenging phenomenon where having a news media organization as a viable business is becoming increasingly harder, because people can go directly to their own audiences as individual contributors now. In the creator economy, you've had the disintermediation of news organizations.
Yeah, I read a fascinating paper, it was a few years ago now, basically saying that all companies need to become media production houses. I know I go on and on about this because it fascinates me and I haven't quite figured it out yet, but just video. It's almost as easy now to pop onto your Substack or pop onto your YouTube channel, do a short, post it, and move it.
It's a different format that's gotten a lot more popular. It's a lot easier to produce and distribute.
Well, and I think TikTok drove a
Yeah.
lot of this, right? And then it's just bringing audiences along.
There are a lot of people who would just take their phone and they will just be walking and talking. I will say that there is a intermingling, I'd say, of sort of content creation and companies needing to create more content. Let's still talk about PR and what can it get you today.
This episode of Misadventures in Marketing is brought to you by the American Marketing Association, San Francisco. AMASF is a member-run organization that has been serving the Bay Area marketing community for over 80 years. Through programs, events, workshops, and discussions that introduce the latest trends and developments in the industry, to networking events that bring together the best marketing minds in the region, AMASF diligently works to foster professional learning and career advancement opportunities for all of its members. Joining is easy. To become a member of AMASF, go to amasf.org. That's amasf.org, and click on Get Involved on the top menu, then become a member. For just $199 a year, you'll get access to events, resources, credentialed learning opportunities, and a community of fellow marketers who will help you expand your network and advance your career. The AMASF membership, the investment you make for the career you love.
Can I, if I could just interject one thought there, because that's, again, we're completely on the same wavelength. Selling PR as internally to the CEO and the other members of the management team as something that marketing should be spending its time on. Because I have more than once run into the situation where there was just no appreciation of PR being the cheapest, most leverageable demand generation effort that marketing can possibly engage in. Because if I can get an article on TechCrunch or Engadget or Fortune.com, that is millions and millions of impressions, but a lot of people just don't buy it. Now, I'm sure there are tools out there that you could employ to help put some metrics around it to show people like these leads came into the website due to the Fortune article. But I've usually found it a hard sell because it's just way too soft for people to appreciate, as opposed to, paying for a Google ad campaign, or, getting a viral video or a blog post up. You can show the metrics leading back to the website.
If I think about PR, the way I'd say most people think about it in a company, usually your management team, it's like, hey, go get us mentioned in an article, go get an article written about us. Well, the first thing I typically have to talk about, politely or impolitely, is reporters don't give a shit about us. Their job is not to promote us. It's not a commercial exchange. And they don't care about that. What they care about is something quote unquote newsworthy to their readership. And so then you get back into this idea of what is newsworthy. And that's usually what we have to talk about. So now, content, as I mentioned before, is highly related. And I do actually think that data-driven pieces are your best chance for getting news coverage, because now you're developing an insight strategically that could be useful to that reporter's audience. And you have to kind of find what's relevant about it. About like you have to say, like, I'm in AI now, and so can I shed some interesting insight on how people are interacting with AI in ways we didn't expect? That might be interesting. For example, can I prove that with data? Can I have a nice chart? So I would have to develop that idea. Depending on the type of company you're in, isn't as hard to sell as a concept. Then you get into the game of how do we prepare for that? What's the right way to do it? Maybe that gets a little bit into how do you write a press release? Should you write a press release? Should you put it on your blog? Either way, what do you have to include in it so that you check the boxes on whether or not a blogger or reporter wants to cover it? Then how do you get them aware and line up an interview? And you can get into some timing and things like embargoes and stuff like that. But the process of then bringing that out there and trying to get the attention of the reporter to cover it.
Yeah. There was one situation I was in where I was interacting directly with a very high-powered reporter at a major publication, and she really, really, really wanted to break the news on the company's latest round. And we were going through a series of negotiations and horse trading because I didn't want to give it to her. We had another strategy around how we were going to announce that, but it was a big, big, big major publication, well regarded in business. And eventually, I had to give it to her because otherwise she was just going to say, I'm not interested. And this is to your point about, in a way, our stories are just...
If Kara Swisher wants to cover something, you give it to Kara.
Exactly. But it's kind of what you were saying. I don't want this to sound too negative, but we're just kind of chum to them. They're just feeding down this thing and moving on and then going on to the next company. It really is about, what are you going to do for me?
The currency for them is quote unquote news, right? Which is a scoop. They want a scoop. Exactly. They want an exclusive. The problem is timing. There's a lot that goes into it. So assuming you don't have a big news event that's sucking all the oxygen out of the room, because things happen, big scandals happen, big announcements happen from big companies, and everything's going to get drowned out at that point. You're not going to be interesting. If somebody takes the news and covers it, then other reporters don't want to cover it. So then you have to think of a completely different angle that might work. Sometimes you get what I call echo coverage, which is a big outlet that cover things, and there are other outlets that just repost what the bigger ones do. So sometimes you get repeated out into a smaller outlet because someone just kind of summarizes the news. It's hard to start a fire in PR, and it's hard to have relationships. That's why I think agencies still have an advantage, because they are bringing a lot of things to reporters, and it makes it convenient-ish to them.
I just want to talk about one little side avenue real quick before we move on, and that's analyst relations. Certainly out there in terms of media, there's often kind of a fuzzy line between various press outlets and analyst firms. And of course, these aren't supply side analysts, these are industry analysts. And, you engage with them, right? You'll pay 50, 75, 100K a year, and you'll get various interactions with them over that time. And a lot of these firms, like Gartner, Gartner has the Magic Quadrant, Forrester has their Wave, and I'm sure, there are many other of these highly respected reports that come out for their clients, for the corporations. As you as I know, Peter, there are a lot of Fortune 500 companies that simply you can't get on their vendor list if you're not in the Magic Quadrant, right? You're not even in the consideration set. And I certainly went through that. I can't take all the credit for it, but I was at a developer tools company, and the product manager on this one product line had been working this for years with Gartner. And while I was there, he and I kind of took it over the line, and we got in the Magic Quadrant for our one little developer tool vertical there. And in a way, these things are also earned media, right? It's getting other authoritative voices who are in the market and influencing buyers to, pay attention to you and read about you in these analyst reports and make purchasing decisions off that.
Yeah, AR, I would put it in the category of influencing typically mid-market and above buyers and technical buyers often. So you mentioned Forrester and Gartner. I don't think Yankee Group's around anymore, but they're analysts who cover a different market space and categories, and they talk about the vendors that make up a category, for example. So yeah, it's a different set of relationships, and it's more about market influence and validation. PR outlets, it's more broader public consumption. It's broader storytelling. It's more about your brand reputation as a company. You're trying to get that media coverage. You're trying to be relatable and inspiring. There are different audiences that reach different intermediaries for different reasons, but they can be conflated as relatable. If you're at a large company, you do have AR and PR. Yeah. And they are separate set of relationships, separate kind of emotions.
So wrapping up, where does PR fit in all this these days?
I
What
mean,
do you do?
Yeah, I mean, we just went through a cycle of it. I think that we are finding we're in a very noisy space, and it's hard for us. We just kind of made we had two or three interviews over the last few weeks. That two didn't lead to coverage, but we got to know some reporters. So that's the other thing too, I'll say is I think it's always valuable. I think it doesn't always seem as attractive because, again, unlike paid media, you can't just control it and start seeing results right away. You have to play into building the right storylines credibly, building the right relationships. It's a long game. The thing that I think about with PR more than anything is it's a quote unquote long game. Very valuable. A great PR agency makes a humongous difference in understanding the nuances and the strategy and playing a longer game. I will also say, if you work with an agency, my attitude has always been help them help you. That means you need to consciously have them informed and early in lots of discussions and lots of product release conversations. You have to keep them abreast because it takes a while to spin PR up and to really think about it and plan it. And there are things you can do in between big tent poles. You can do what's called proactive pitching and trying to get in trend stories. They have relationships with reporters and they know what reporters might want to cover. They might be able to give a reporter an interesting idea that's more selfless. It's not like, hey, cover me. It's like, hey, this is an interesting trend that we could also possibly help comment on, and maybe you have a quote inclusion in paragraph 7 or something.
Yeah,
but that's
becoming
the
part
game.
of the conversation, so to speak.
Exactly. You're trying to join credible conversations. Maybe you get a chance to influence them, and that's the difference, right? The difference is you don't control it, you influence it. You can't dictate it, but you can sometimes shape it. And you want to join and become credible. If you reach a certain level of PR credibility and a set of relationships, and I've been here before, and I have, this is not a brag, but I have several notable reporters on my cell phone, and I can text them, and I don't because, I don't want to bug them because, again, that's part of the relationship is don't bother them unless you have something relevant. And even then, what I probably get as far as privileges, they often will respond to me. That's the other thing is people who don't deal with PR a lot don't realize that reporters are underwater constantly from an email inbox standpoint. They're what's called bankrupt. They're inbox bankrupt. They they can't get back to everything. Everybody's pitching them all kinds of stuff all the
Right.
time, and expecting them to cover and bothering them, and it's noisy for them. And that's why I think it's also hard to get into PR, because like sales, there can be a lot of quote unquote rejection or just silence. You're not sure if you're doing
Mhm.
the right thing and it's even working, right? So
Yeah.
that's why sometimes you need to be taught what to do and shown how to do it, and you have to go through it, and you have to get a sense again to build your own gut or your own divining stick or compass around what is newsworthy, what's relevant, what's interesting.
You have to have a CEO who gets that and appreciates what you said, which I think is probably the best takeaway of all of this. It is a long game. And in a way, it's part of your branding strategy over time. And you build these relationships, and it takes years. And eventually, like you said, you become part of the environment, part of the discussion and the ecosystem. And then they start reaching out to you when they need commentary
That's
on a
right.
topic. Like we would like your CEO to talk on this, but completely right that this is, a softer investment up front that takes a long time to pay off. But, it's still relevant. I mean, I think we can both say
Well,
PR is still very relevant. You still need to do it, but there's got to be appreciation for the long game here and the brand building you're trying to do over time.
it's relevant and it's still very valuable. People still read TechCrunch, even though, a lot of cool startup CEOs I talk to are like, oh, TechCrunch. It's like, yeah, but people read it, right? It's still reputable. And it just got sold. It got sold out of Yahoo to a private equity company
PE
now
firm, yeah.
that claims it will grow it and give it more resources, which I hope, because I've always liked TechCrunch. All the way back to the Michael Arrington era. It's always been great.
This episode of Misadventures in Marketing is brought to you by Peakbound Studio, the Bay Area video production house for high-impact marketing videos. Online video is quickly becoming the universal language of business and the primary medium through which marketers speak to their prospects. According to Forbes and market research firm Statista, 90% of all businesses are currently using online video in their marketing. And in 2025, 85% of those businesses will increase their spending in online video over last year. Enter Peakbound Studio. Peakbound Studio is not just another video production team. They are storytellers, visual artists, and high-tech experts rolled into one. They manage everything from the initial concept to final edit. Your online video presence has to be responsive, vibrant, and constant to get the attention of prospects and spread your message into every corner of the marketplace. Peakbound makes sure your messages are unique, compelling, and pop in today's attention-scarce world. So whether you need brand storytelling, customer testimonials, corporate videos, or short-form social media content, Peakbound delivers videos that don't just look good, they work. Learn more at www.peakbound.studio. That's www.peakbound.studio. Peakbound Studio, the video production house that puts your online video to work.
I will say that you're echoing the PR is a long game, and you're mentioning something about CEO. I have lots of stories about when it's gone well and when it's gone bad. And I do think a common denominator is when a CEO gets it, at least intuitively. Sometimes you're working with earlier stage CEOs, later stage CEOs. For them, it can be just yet another meeting. It may not even turn into coverage. The coverage comes back. It's not exactly what they wanted. Sometimes they'll ask you, oh, can you change this? Usually cannot change whatever's written, by the way.
Sure.
It's a real faux pas. And also the reporter, again, doesn't have time to go back and change your stuff that you're not happy about, right? They're not there to serve you. They're there to serve their audience. But, look, to your point, like I'll tell one story that, it was so bad that I pulled the CEO aside, and it could have been the beginning of the end of my job there. But we were a company, we were a startup. We didn't necessarily have the most interesting product storyline. We were working with a pretty good firm. So we were at least at that level where we were working with a firm. We had an interesting story about working remotely and distributed as a team. And this was pre-pandemic, where it wasn't as interesting of a topic yet. They did have a novel setup in terms of people could work anywhere, and as a result, we were getting really high talent engineering from non-San Francisco or New York based markets. So it was less for us. It was kind of a win-win. So there was a story. So Bloomberg wanted to do a piece on it, and it was a print piece. And that's like a big deal. Like Bloomberg is up there with The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times print. And print, for those who don't know, might sound like a dinosaur. Print is the top of the pyramid. Print is like very hard to get and very valuable. And oh, by the way, television segment producers read those print things, and that can turn into broadcast news segments, by the way. Right. So there's a whole food chain. So we get this guy, it's on a Friday, it's around noon. I'm looking around. Hey, where's CEO? Oh, went home, going out of town with his brother over the weekend on some bender or something. So he's not in the room with me. And this is a real live call. We weren't in person, fortunately. We get on the call and, reporter starts asking questions, and the CEO seems super distracted and rambling. And, we prepped. By the way, I have a real firm, so we've gone through the prep and the media training, and there's a document, and, sometimes they're not that helpful, but basically he wasn't taking it very seriously is the bottom line. And then I start hearing like clunk, 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 beep, beep, beep. He's doing his laundry. He's like in his laundry room doing laundry, absentmindedly having a conversation with an interview. So he's multitasking, but also you hear the dryer door opening and the beeping and all this noise. And then there's a lot of like, oh, sorry, could you repeat that? Like, couldn't be bothered. We didn't end up getting coverage. So I pulled him aside the next week and just said, these are adult conversations that I feel I have to have, whether they're good for me or not. And I basically said, and I can be extremely diplomatic because I don't want to get killed. I do want to keep my job. But I basically said in the nicest way possible that he let a lot of people down, that, and not me, but there's an agency that worked really hard to, like, pieces like this don't come along, especially for a company our size. And this was a very high value media opportunity that also could get us new media opportunities. And the amount of work it took by several people over probably months to line this up, to get the idea incepted in the reporter's head to cover this bigger trend piece and have us be part of it and nobody contributing to it. And then to basically disappear, be MIA that day, and then finally hop on late and disheveled and scatterbrained and multitasking and just, embarrassing. And I didn't say all that, but I basically said, hey, like, this is a poor use of resources and you've got to show up, and you were just the last link in a long chain. We had to kind of handcraft and build with precious materials, and you blew it. And I'm sure he heard it in my voice. I was being as cool as I could, but I also had been to the mountaintops many times, and this person hadn't. And I was just like, look, man, the company deserves better than that. And this was a real big opportunity. And, again, I sugarcoated as much as I could. I'm getting angry just thinking about it. I did not show that anger at that time, but we already had a tense relationship because clearly, like, we didn't share the same values.
Yeah,
so.
Peter, I feel your pain. This is amazing because pretty much that exact same thing happened to me. I get it.
What a waste. Like, making startups work is so hard, and getting media for a little startup that arguably doesn't deserve it and by a real outlet is so hard. And just somebody who's so out to lunch. What a squandered opportunity.
Right.
Just and a self-inflicted mistake.
Yeah.
So, Steve, we've talked about PR. We've talked about where it fits. How do you do it today in today's modern landscape? Is it even still relevant? How do you go about it? And I think we've had a great discussion. It still has a place. It's getting harder than ever. But if you can make it work, I still think it's extremely powerful. And with that, I appreciate this conversation we've had, Steve, and please read us out.
All right. Well, thanks to our audience, first of all, for listening. Our editor, Lorenzo Fernandez-Kopec at Peakbound Studio, for making us sound and look great. Our marketing maven, Ian Robinson Lambert, for getting the word out. Ariana Azevedo for our brand and graphics. And of course, our thanks to Eric Widener, the president of AMA San Francisco, for presenting this podcast.